Hope, again, you've got that similar situation, and it brings up a couple different points. We hear from Marcus and hear from Brandon. One is the distinction that might be made by both patients and providers between a supportive care drug, a drug for a chronic disease that doesn't have a short-term or immediate life-threatening component, and a life-threatening disease. And will those differences be the kinds of differences that will create higher bars in order to gain that acceptance? Institutionally and within your practice and within your peers, what has been the adoption of the biosimilar for Neupogen?
So the biosimilar, it's actually a fascinating world because therapeutic drugs obviously are a different consideration and require different considerations, but for the growth factor used, and we use a lot of growth factors in breast cancer oncology as well as in other areas of oncology, the decisions about what agent we use are very much determined by negotiations, as you pointed out, practices, but the insurers also. So they're going to tell us what we're going to do. And what happens at the university level, and I think in many of the managed practices, is that there are contracts that are developed. So if you're going to use a certain amount of product, you're going to get it for this price. And so the actual biosimilar has been adopted, and there was an email that went out about discussing it if we had any comments or concerns. We've all looked at the data and didn't have comments or concerns. And so now we have actually adopted the use of the biosimilar for what we're giving in patients in the outpatient pharmacy and in inpatient. For patients who received their growth factor at home, then it very much depends on the this injectable pharmacy plan that many people have, where you actually make a contract and get approval through this identified group that delivers the medication to home as opposed to going to the pharmacy itself. And so that just depends on the individual pharmacy and what they want to cover. And I think that for us, what's been interesting is to see how that's changed over time. So, we give short-acting growth factor, that's where the biosimilar is, but we give a lot of the long-acting growth factor, pegfilgrastim. And pegfilgrastim now has come out with a new delivery system where you put this little white package on your skin and it flashes this little green light for 24 hours until it delivers itself automatically into the skin. So for anything where we're dosing, for example, chemotherapy in a dose dense, we give doxorubicin and cyclophosphamide dose dense, where we give those drugs every 2 weeks. We've been using this product, the sort of whatever it is, delayed delivery of pegfilgrastim, which is known as Onpro, really in almost everybody, so that we've taken away that whole question. So when we're using the biosimilar is mainly in metastatic disease, where obviously there are different considerations.
So it's interesting because it brings up this issue of it's more complicated than just a drug-to-drug comparison because it's a dynamic moving marketplace. And I don't know if you know the stats from your institution. I know what they are nationally, but in terms of the use of the long-acting pegfilgrastim versus the short-acting daily. And do you know what that difference is at your institution?
In our practice, it depends on the chemotherapy regimen. Right. But almost always we're using the long-acting in specific situations for stem cell transplant, as well as if the chemotherapy regimen is given less frequent or more frequently than every 14 days, we would do Neupogen instead. So our use is kind of variable as far as that, but the long-acting is typically the largest use for us. But then the number of doses would be the Neupogen since we give it daily.
So yeah, I've seen outside of mobilization for stem cell transplant, the use is almost all long-acting. And the long-acting has somewhere in the range nationally of an 85-90% market share. So now on top of that, Hope, you introduced this idea that you've already got this distinction, and there will be a biosimilar to the long-acting, but now the long-acting has upped the game because now they have a different delivery system. And that difference in delivery system is going to be looked at now as we look at other biosimilars coming into the market. And so one would be a drug like rituximab, which is also on this short list of drugs to come off patent for which there are biosimilars in development. But in that case, you've got now a sub-Q administration as opposed to a long IV infusion. And so I kind of see this as a pattern. Marcus, within the world of the rheumatologic drugs, now you're going to have 5 biosimilars, and they're likely to be in use. Are we seeing any differences either in terms of this manufactured obsolescence where there's going to be a better anti-CD20 antibody that's likely to take the place of the old, and so the biosimilar will become a dated product, or we're seeing changes in terms of the administration delivery system that's going to facilitate a difficulty in adopting because it'll have a quality of life or less consumerism around it.
Yes. Well, I think that those are being developed and they're starting to hit the market. Tofacitinib hit the market, and then it came out with a longer-acting product soon thereafter. So we see that, and that's a small molecule, not a biosimilar, but you know when we see this in every different type of medication in oncology, rheumatology. But I do not think that's going to be a big issue at this point, mainly because of the medications we use are lifelong, and the delivery devices are things that certainly play a role, but when you're dealing with the medication for rheumatoid arthritis, it's more the medication than it is to the delivery device.
And it is interesting just to point out about the growth factors and delivery systems that if you could, for example, a lot of people use the pegfilgrastim with docetaxel cyclophosphamide for breast cancer, but you probably only need filgrastim for 5 doses for most. And some places, the HMOs might choose not to give any growth factor for the first cycle because the rate of febrile neutropenia may not reach their criteria for giving growth factors up front. And then you think about it, if you have a biosimilar product that's a fraction of the cost, if that's what it turns out to be for the institution, you're giving 5 doses of that versus the Onpro, then that decision may be taken out of our hands for some situations.